And the reason I want to start with this verse from Psalms because it states a Torah-itic principle, so to speak, that I think Shemitah is trying to get at and reveal. So it says, "L'David Mizmor L'Adonai." This is Psalm 24. Haaretz umlo'ah tevel v'yoshveva. So L'Adonai haaretz umlo'ah tevel v'yoshveva. So the earth is the Lord's. Who does the earth belong to? Right? It belongs to God and all that it holds, the world and its inhabitants. Right? So everything in our world, this psalm is saying belongs to God. So what I want to present, the way I want to present Shemitah is that it reveals that underlying principle. Now, whether you buy into that assumption or not is, one thing. But it's certainly the Torah's presumption that everything belongs to God. Okay, and we'll see that also in our Parsha, which is Bahar. Okay, so Asher Chaim, do you feel like reading today? Great, thank you so much. So I'll probably stop you here and there. So just read one verse and give a pause, and then read another verse and give a pause. Okay, thank you so much in Hebrew and English.
Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor. Yud-Heh Vav-Heh spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yamarta alehem, ki tavo el haaretz asher ani noten lachem. Speak to bnei Yisrael and say to them, when you come into the land that I give them, v'shavta haaretz Shabbat ladonai.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute. Thank you so much.
I'll translate those 4 words.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Earth or the land will Shabbatify, enact Shabbat in the presence of, before, for the sake of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh.
I love that, Shabbatify, right? It sounds like Spotify, but it's Shabbatify. I love that. So first of all, it's so interesting that God speaks to Moshe at Har Sinai, because we're not at Har Sinai, which gives rise to the famous question in Rashi and also in the Midrash, Ma Har Sinai Eitzel Shemitah, or Ma Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. So what does this have to do with that? Like, what's going on here? And why is this specific law said in relationship to Har Sinai? So there's a lot to say about this. I'm going to say a little. One is, the question is like I was, studying this morning with my chavruta, what does this have to do with the price of eggs in China? She was watching a film in Israel, a film in English, and the way it was translated in Hebrew subtitles is, Ma Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai, or Ma Har Sinai Eitzel Shemitah. So that's interesting. It's like, what does this have to do with anything? Why here? And I've read certain contemporary commentators that says, because this ultimately is everything. Like, all the mitzvot are preparing us for this kind of release and this kind of awareness and this kind of consciousness. And we'll see that this kind of release and awareness and consciousness have to do with, trust, faith, justice. I mean, it operates on so many levels. So one could say it contains perhaps the whole Torah on some level. So
you're up.
What?
Ooh.
Okay, so let's hold that. And then I want to also point out that it says in verse 2, V'shavta haaretz Shabbat ladonai. So the land is stopping, is resting a Shabbat for God, right? A Shabbat for God. So just as in Genesis, God rests, in the beginning, right? I said last night in my sermon, in the beginning, God stops. And here the land stops. And there's something in our tradition that's really profound and central about stopping, because every 7 days we stop, and every 7 years, the land stops. Okay, so let's go on. And we have that, that same 6-7 thing going on, right? We know that 7 is the number for Kedusha, for sanctity. Right? So 6 days, we live like normal people, so to speak. 7th day, for God. Right? Clear out our sort of pragmatic consciousness, right? Getting things done, transactional consciousness, and live in awareness, a different kind of awareness. Okay, go on.
May I throw in something first?
Yes, you may.
Um,
Your
elements,
prerogative, reader's prerogative.
elements of style, we generally in English do not say eat and eating or sit a sitting, but we try to use different words. But Hebrew loves to use the same word twice, first as a verb and then as an abstract noun. So just as Shabbat means more than just stop, but a whole panoply of stuff, you Shabbat a Shabbat, as it were. And here it's the earth that is Shabbating a Shabbat.
Yes.
Can that volume be turned?
Can that volume be turned up?
It's hard to hear.
It's hard to hear. Okay, could you see if you can get Justin? He would be able to help me with that. But you're right, the volume should definitely, thank you. Okay.
I'll
'Cause I
try to
can't
raise
do
my
it.
volume.
What?
I'll try to raise my volume.
Yeah, for some reason.
Shesh
it's
shanim
constant.
tizra sadecha v'shesh shanim tizmor charmecha. For 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you shall prune your vineyard. Ve'asafta et tvata, and you
Right.
shall gather in the yield.
Okay.
Uvashana. Keep going.
Yeah.
Uvashana hashvi'it Shabbat Shabbaton yihye la'aretz. Shabbat ladonai. Sadecha lo tizra v'charmecha lo tizmor. However, on the 7th year, the land shall, I'm sorry, Shabbat Shabbaton, the earth should have a Shabbat of Shabbats, a Shabbat to Yud He Vav He. Do not sow your field, do not prune your vineyard. 8 Sefiach Katircha.
Okay, I'm sorry, just stop 1 second. So again, 7th year, and you see how the 7th year Shvi'it is alliterative with Shabbat, right? Sheva and Shabbat go along together. And then Shabbat Hashvi'it, Shabbat, Shabbaton, Yela Ard Shabbat, right? So if you didn't get the picture beforehand, you better get it now, right? Shabbat, Sheva, Shabbat, Sheva, right? So there's something profound and insistent about here, about the land resting this sacred rest. Okay, everybody in the room, we are on verse 5 in Leviticus 25.
8 Sefiach Katircha lo tiqtzor, v'et invei nizirecha lo tivtzor, shnat Shabbaton yihye la'aretz. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest, nor gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete Shabbat for the land.
Okay, great. So notice that the untrimmed vines in Ve Nizirecha has the same word as the Nazirite, the Nazir who doesn't cut his hair, right, and doesn't drink wine and sort of lives an like a wild existence in the context of making a vow to God. Right? So we've got that concept here. And again, we have, if you didn't get it till now, Shnat Shabbaton. Okay, I'm going to read because people in the room can't hear until we resolve the sound issue. But thank you very much, Asher Chaim. Vahaita Vav 6. Vahaita. It's just, I'm like reading it now is almost funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it's again like this repeat of the word Shabbat. It's a real insistence in encoding into like a literary fabric this idea of land and rest. But here it says, verse 6, so when the land rests, there's going to be food for you, right? You're just going to eat what grows wildly that year. For you, your slave, your handmaiden, your employees, or your wage laborers or slaves, I'm not sure which. This is translated bound laborers, I'm not sure. Hagarim imecha, that live with you. Okay, but then get this. So this is for everybody, right? All human beings. And now we're extending it, right? So all human beings, slaves, female slaves, the people that work for you, everybody, doesn't say anything about ethnicity, so everybody in your midst. And then for the animals, so 7, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. Okay. So there's a stopping so far, and there's an availability of food for everybody, right? So there's a release of the concept of ownership. It becomes the land becomes ownerless or hefker. Okay, so let's go on in verse 8. The sarfarta lecha sheva shabtot shanim, sheva pe'amim, v'hayu lecha yemei sheva shabtot hashanim, tesha v'arba'im shana. So even if you don't know Hebrew, right? What are you hearing? Like, it's unbelievable, right? So now this sense of Shabbat, it's multiplying. It's almost like a poem that's getting more alliterative, right? So now you count 7 sabbatical years, right? 7 years times 7. Hold on, I just want to see how they translate this. So the period of 7 weeks of years. So weeks here is just another way of saying 7 to give you a total of 49. Okay. And then what happens? So there's this great culmination of Shabbat energy, of stopping energy, of sacred energy. So now we're moving into another 7. So we sound the horn in the 7th month, on the 10th day of that month, which is of course biyom hakippurim. Ta'avir shofar, we sound the horn, the chol artzachem, in the whole land. Now verse 10, the kidashtem et shnat hachamishim shana ukratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. So you shall hallow or sanctify the 50th year, so 7 times 7 and then 50. Ukratem dror, so you proclaim liberty to all its inhabitants. Yovel hi tiyelachem v'shavtem ish el achuzato ish el mishpachto tashuvu. So you shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to your holding, and each of you shall return to your family. So whatever you've amassed throughout the years, forget about it. You go back to your ancestral holdings, right? So it evens everything out class-wise. Like whatever you were given for your tribe at the beginning, that's what you go back to. Forget about all you amassed. Like let's say Paul here owns 2 vacation houses, right? Forget the vacation houses. Goes back to the beginning, whatever he inherited from God directly at the beginning, your tribal land, that's your land. And, it suddenly had a resonance for me in our history. Like imagine we went back to the beginning of America's history to our ancestral, to ancestral holdings. I mean, I guess it's absolutely possible. And this is clearly an idealized version of how, things should be or would be. And what I think it's doing is sort of imagining what a world would look like if we really understood that this land was not ours but God's. So let's go on a little bit. I will definitely take comments, but I want to go on a little bit and make sure that sufficient content is on the table. So first, let's see what this does to the sound.
So you would have to, we would have to mute you, somebody.
I can mute myself.
So you have to mute yourself.
Right now?
Whenever.
Right now?
Whenever someone's talking.
The speaker, you have to turn off your speaker whenever someone speaks. If we use this, you could just try turning off this button here, your sound.
I see.
Okay. So now just let's. So now ask someone to say something.
Okay, Asher Chaim, say something, please. You have to,
I didn't even have to.
no, I have to shut this off.
Yes, you have to.
Yeah,
Asher Chaim, say something.
Okay.
Nice.
Is that louder? Is that hearable?
Testing. Re-
And
There was a court in Maine that actually held that the Great Replacement should be unraveled and that most of the land of the state of Maine should go back to the indigenous people. This was about 10 years ago, I think. A vast swath of northern Maine.
Interesting. Okay, wait, what do I do so that they should hear me?
Just
Nothing?
talk. I think they
Okay,
can
great.
hear you, right? Can
Okay.
everyone hear?
Can you hear me? Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, Asher Chaim. Okay, I'm gonna go on. I see their hands, but I want everyone to have patience for a little while. Okay, drawer is an interesting concept. I think it was translated as emancipation, but I love these, like, you know, the multiple valences of this word: flowing, free, run, liberty. I saw somewhere else clear, like to clear away the decks. And then Yovel is a jubilee, right? A ram's horn, or one instrument. Okay. Now let's talk about anxiety, because this is really crucial. If you want to move into Shemitah or even Shemitah consciousness, then you got to deal with your anxiety.
Okay.
And I love reading this passage because there's something so contemporary to me. In other words, it really rings true in my own experience. It really hits home. We'll see if it does for you. Vasitem et chukotai et mishpatai, I'm in verse 18 in chapter 25. Tishmaru. Tishmaru, sorry. Et mishpatai tishmaru. Vasitem otam v'yishavtem al ha'art levetach. So you shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules. Forget the word faithfully there. I don't see it in the Hebrew. You shall observe my laws and keep my rules, or guard my rules, that you may live upon the land in security or in confidence. It's also another word for trust, levetach. So you feel confident, right? If you observe these rules. But natna ha'aretz priyah v'ahaltam l'sova v'yishavtam levetach aleha. And the earth shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, right? L'sova, to satisfaction, another word that you can find in Birkat Hamazon, the prayer, the grace after meals. And again, v'yishavtem levetach aleha, and you shall live upon it in confidence, in security, in trust. Okay, but if you say, so I love this question. So there's an anticipation by the Torah of people's sort of like, this is not going to work. There's a problem here, right? And hearing the people's voice, V'chi tomru, ma nochal, b'shana hashpi'it, hein lo nizra v'lo ne'esof et t'ru'atenu. And should you ask, what do we need in the seventh year if we may neither sow nor gather our crops? What's going to happen? How's this going to work? I'm going to go hungry. So I'm anxious about this. I'm not going to have enough. I'm not going to have enough. I'm, not going to get what I need. V'siviti et birchati lachem b'shana hashishit v'asa et ha'torah l'shlosh hashanim. I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. So the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. And why do you need in the 8th year? Because in the 7th year, you haven't planned anything. Now, when I was studying with my chavrita this morning, I don't know if she's here, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, she said, and I think there's a great association, this reminds me of what Joseph did in Genesis, because what Joseph did is collect enough so that there would be enough, there would be abundance during famine. Now, Shemitah is not famine, but there's a sense that you get everything you need in the 6th year to carry you through. It's also that it's also related to getting the double amount of manna on the 6th day, so you can keep Shabbat and not collect manna on the 7th day. right? And it's behind the traditional understanding of Shabbat. You don't cook on Shabbat. You cook everything you need. You buy everything you need. You shop. You do everything, and you have everything you need for a day, and you don't have to worry about it, right? So it's like sort of a study in God. It's a practice in studying God consciousness and trust. Okay. Uzratem et hashana shminit. ואכלתם מן התרועה ישן עד השנה התשיעית, עד בוא תבואתה תאכלו ישן. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of that crop. I guess from the 6th year, you'll be eating the old until the 9th year, until its crops come in, because you don't sow until the 8th year. But, okay, now get this. The land must not be sold beyond claim. Don't get confused, right? When you buy and sell, that this is really yours. It's not the way it works. Why? Kili haaretz. And now we go back to that Psalms principle. Kili haaretz, ki gerim v'toshavim aten imadi. For the land is mine, right? The land is God's. It's not ours. Wow. Could you imagine if we really understood that? How radical that would be, and how radicalized we would be in our way of life. You are but strangers and residents with me, right? Gerim v'toshavim aten imi. V'chol aretz achuzatchem geula titnu la'aretz. About the land that you hold, you must provide for the redemption of the land. Ki yamuch achicha umachar me'achuzato uvago alo hakarov elav v'ga'al et minkar achiv. If one of your kin is in straits and has to sell part of a holding, the nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what that relative has sold. Okay. So I want to read a couple of things and I will open it up. This I found on Sefaria from Rabbi David, and I think it's just so beautiful. About really Shemitah consciousness. Something miraculous happens when we stop. We get to experience the power that nature knows called dormancy. Dormancy, that which is holding, the heartbeat that rests, the hibernating animals, all of winter, waiting and waiting. There are seeds inside each and every one of us, inside this culture, that cannot emerge because we do not know that dormancy does not mean death. Resting does not mean disappearing. What keeps us from stopping is that we are terrified of resting. We're afraid of the imaginative, terrible things we will feel in the quiet. We fear that when we stop, even for a moment, the sheer enormity of our lives will overwhelm us. Our outspoken and unspoken fears, they speed up our lives. Like a stone being thrown over a lake, we've learned to skip so we don't get too wet. We're terrified that if we let the stone fall, we will disappear. And so we think that our speed will save us from the void. We dance around the security that is offered from touching what is underneath the speed. Can we let go of the obsession of finishing what can't be finished? So this so relates to, all these concepts: release, surrender, Shabbat, rest. Okay, one more thing, and I'm going to open it up. So this comes out of my chavruta with Rabbi Sharon, and she's taught me a lot about Lewis Hyde, who talks about a gift economy. So describing different tribal economies of gift exchange, Hyde emphasizes the distinction between reciprocal giving and circular giving. When the gift moves in a circle, he notes, no one ever receives it from the same person he gives it to or she gives it to. The smaller the circle is, and particularly if it is just two people, the more a person, a human being, can keep their eye on things, and the more likely it is she will start to think like a salesman. It is when the gift passes out of sight, when we let it out of our control, that the real fruits of the exchange begin to be felt. It is through this prism that Hyde invites us to understand the sacrificial system of ancient Israel is a traditional gift cycle, one that includes the people, the flocks, the priests, and God. The inclusion of God in the circle, he suggests, changes and enlarges the way the gift moves unlike any other addition. The gift we offer passes out of sight and into mystery, a gesture that implicitly acknowledges the great mystery from which the gift of life itself comes to us. So one more. The passage of the gift into mystery always refreshes. We are enlightened when our gifts rise from pools we cannot fathom. Then we know they are inexhaustible. Anything contained within a boundary must contain as well its own exhaustion. When the gift passes out of sight and then returns, we are enlightened. It's a beautiful thing to think about Torah in that way. Okay, so stop my share. Okay, I'm going to, just because we have a lot more material to get through, or to not get through, but to explore. I'm going to ask people, as I usually do, to be, really concise, which I know is a challenge. I know it's a challenge. So, okay, I'm going to go in the order of the boxes and the hands on my screen, and start with Amy from Tallahassee.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I have a question. I went. It's very brief. I went to Costco.
Yeah, great.
And I bought a bag of grapefruit from Israel.
Yeah.
Now I've never seen that before, and it made me wonder if the reason that we are getting Israeli grapefruit here in Florida, which is of course a citrus state, is because it's the Shemitah year and they're allowed to ship their citrus out at this point in a different way. That's all I want to ask.
I think that's a great point. So it's interesting. A friend of mine really goes a little nuts because there's so much about Shemitah in the Jewish world this year, because it's a Shemitah year. She says, it only applies in the land of Israel. What are we talking about? Right? It's about, like, if you're a farmer in Israel, you have to think about it. Otherwise, you don't have to think about it. We're thinking about it, as far as I'm concerned, because I think it reveals something about how we could relate to earth and life that is important for all of us, even if it doesn't have practical, legal connotations. Now, in the land of Israel, what's happened is that there are all kinds of loopholes, as Amy is saying, about how people do and don't observe Shemitah, because God seems to be falling down on the job of the 6th year, right? So when there's not enough in the 6th year and the farmers still have to make a living, then they figure out how to make a living. So thank you, Amy. Just checking the room to see if anyone wants to say anything. Paul.
So it was shipped here because it was the Shemitah year? Because
Yeah.
I've never seen it there before.
I'm guessing, Amy. I'm guessing that that's true.
Okay.
I'm guessing.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul in the room.
Well, it's not new that compromises are being made. I mean, Rabbi Cook, who became the chief rabbi, he put forward many compromises, ways for the people, the pioneers and the kibbutzim, the moshavim, to find a way to continue to work the land, in a sense, assigning it to someone else, kind of the way a Shabbos goy takes over certain privileges.
So Paul is saying that the first chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, found all kinds of legal ways for the first settlers of Israel to make life.
He felt but he got a lot of pushback from other parts of the rabbinate.
To make life sustainable despite pushback. That's really the history of the halacha, of halacha and responsa is, how can halacha become livable? How can it become livable? Like, that's a sort of a driving force in response. So absolutely, especially upon the creation of the state of Israel. Okay, I see Beth.
Shabbat shalom. I wanted to comment on the idea of the land being redeemable and original inhabitants. There almost are no original inhabitants. Humans migrated out of Africa at some point in deep history. And in the various locations where humans are now, there is a history of human settlement, and yet throughout human history, there have been mass migrations episodically throughout the entire arc of human history. And there's almost no such thing as an Aboriginal right to anything.
Okay, that's helpful. So that vision for us is eclipse of like original ownership. But I still think the point is I introduced that not so that we would take it literally, but the point is that that there's no, at least the point in the Torah is there's no ownership unless God assigns it.
Mhm.
So let's just stick with that for the moment. Okay, Roberta. Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. The connection between Shemitah and Shmata, or Samatha, which are core Buddhist practices that mean stopping, it's the same root, which is kind of mind-blowing. First of all, Shemitah.
Roberta, I talked about this last night. Did you hear it?
Oh, no, I'm in Woodstock, so I was with the Woodstock Jewish congregation. Sorry.
You know, it's interesting because I did some research on this. So the Buddhist word, and Thich Nhat Hanh discusses it in some of his videos, for stopping is shamatha, which I was blown away to hear that. So I did some research. No one I know, and I appeal to several scholars, thinks that the word, even though they seem to mean the same thing or related meanings, seem to be from the same root. I don't know. I've heard that they have a different semantic field.
Well, beautiful. And so for me, something that's so magnificent about this Torah portion is the linking of the stopping that we humans can, you don't want to say aspire to, because then we're not stopping. I mean, it's so non-dualistic, but this state of stopping where we become peace, because the Torah portion, as I understand it, says when we enter the land, then there will be the Shemitah, the stopping. So it's something about the state of inner peace, of inner stopping, that is incumbent upon people to manifest before we can enter the land, because that's the relationship. And we never enter the land in Torah.
Well,
right?
in the 5 books we don't. In the Nevi'im.
Well, but when this part of Torah was birthed, those other parts weren't part of it. I mean, right? Those are the historical parts that are added. Anyway, it's just, looking really closely at the opening pasuk of this parsha. It's something about the state we need to be in to enter.
That's beautiful. And Roberta, I want to take back what I said about, I don't know if the 2 words are related or not. I can't imagine there not being, but I couldn't find any historic connection between those words.
Well, I could just tell you what Thich Nhat Hanh said to me when, year after year, me and Diana Volkstein, who I'm sure some people here know, we were both students of Thai, and we took all our Torah questions to him. And we were like, well, how could this be? And all he would always say is, mindfulness is at the heart of every great spiritual tradition. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be a great spiritual tradition. So it's all coming from this looking deeply, which is what we're doing in our class. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, Nehemiah.
יישר כוח לרוברטה and everyone before me, and I'll continue on you, Roberta, and expand the Sheva. I said.
Nehemiah, where'd you go? Divine.
He stopped so deeply, he disappeared.
Okay, I have to
That's
get.
it. Okay, I'm back.
So good.
The coming back of the Jeda. No, I'm not the Jeda. Anyway, so I want to continue to expand another direction, the Sheba. Of the 5 masters that I've met, one of them, who was not from my tradition, was also the teacher of Ben Gurion. And that was one of the great moments of Ben Gurion, that he invited him. So when he met Ben Gurion, he told me when he was at my home, met Ben Gurion, on the way to Sde Boker, he had to go through many signs of Beersheba. So he looked at it and he said to Ben Gurion, you know what? You have here, in your country, you have here Shiva. Everywhere you have Shiva, which is a name for Yud Hey Vav Hey in this tradition. We say the mantra that some people don't even dare to repeat in other places, but I did. Om Namah Shivaya. I surrender to you, the Lord of all, who is inside me and all around me, Shiva, or Yud Hey Vav Hey. It's all. So the word Shiva is a very powerful word, and we also know that it's Shvuah, vow, and everything else. So power to seven, power to the book. Thank you, Tibarti.
Wow, wow, wow. So all these cross, religious connections, I always find them so powerful, and I'm out of my depth when I hear them because I don't really know how to make sense of them. But
It's hard to shrink.
amazing. Okay, Richard, and then we're going to go on.
3 quick points. One, Beth mentioned Aboriginal claims or indigenous claims. There are gazillions of them in the United States. And the federal courts probably have more cases involving conflicts between majority and indigenous rights than any other kind of case that are heard in the federal courts. It's a constant battle to maintain indigenous claims here. That's much too deep to say more, but they're all over the place in the United States. Second, the Shemitah reminds me of bankruptcy. It's a restart, a biblical version of allowing people to declare, I don't have anything anymore, let me have a new start. And that's a whole nother fascinating analogy. And finally, the whole notion, underlying sort of theoretical or political or sociological contours of US culture is one of autonomy and arrogance. And it rejects the notion that somehow or another there is something beyond ourselves that should have any control over how we deal with our property, if you will. And that is the cause of endless problems for us now, say nothing of global warming, but the arrogance of American culture in controlling land and dealing with it is just overwhelming, and also is worth comparing to the ways in which indigenous cultures tried and by and large failed because of European authority to do something similar with American land. So
Thank you.
this portion just blows my mind.
So I want to say 2 quick things. One is, first of all, I'm always blown away by the perspectives people bring to the table in this room and how our wisdom goes like that around Torah, like other traditions, legal expertise. It's just amazing. So thank you. And yes, I agree with you about the arrogance. And I want to say that the challenge to trust and surrender and release, I think, is not only a challenge culturally and collectively, but for each of us spiritually in a profound way. I know even though I have no food insecurity economically, I'm like, oh my God, is there going to be enough to eat? And where am I going to get my next, what am I going to have next? It's like, how does insecurity manifest within each of us? And I think, even though that may sound self-involved to start going in that direction, I really do think it's all connected. Like if you work on your own sense of faith and trust and ability to release and surrender and know that you can't control it and it's not ultimately yours, see what happens to your world. Things begin to shift. And the gift, you're allowed to, or not allowed, you're enabled, or somehow the gift passes more easily from you to the next person. So I just want to consider that, right? We can have all kinds of critiques about society, and we do, and I do. And let's look inside as well. Paul, loud.
I love the analogy or the metaphor of bankruptcy.
Can people hear on the screen here? Good, okay.
Bankruptcy has both a moral aspect to it.
Yes, it does.
We consider that that society has a moral responsibility to help the debtor. But bankruptcy is a very rule-bound process. And one of the things that I love about this Parsha is the financial rules that are introduced as a necessary construct to Shemitah. The Torah, to me at least, seems to appreciate that we humans are economic creatures in addition to being moral creatures
And anxious creatures.
and anxious. And so as a consequence, there are certain rules
Yes.
that need to be followed in order
Yes.
for society to be able to stand.
And there are
itself.
allowances. It's just like with Shema, like 6 days, you got to make a living, 7-day rest, right? There are allowances.
Right, and transactions. I mean, the way that we are told in the Torah to value property when we are transacting property in anticipation of Shemitah is a very used process. I mean, it's a cash flow discount model. And yeah, I know, exactly. It's bizarre, but it's there. The way that the accrued interest. I mean, in Torah, we're reading about morality, but we're also reading about accrued interest. I mean, it's my field. And it's amazing to me that this process that is inscribed in a moral construct is very precise in how we are to value property when we're moving from person to person. So in sum, the Torah seems to appreciate that morality, in order for it to be workable, in order for it to be useful, has to have an economic and a very specifically prescribed economic construct in order for it to work.
Okay. It makes sense. I don't totally understand it. Do you want to say one more sentence, or should we go on?
Go on.
Okay. I'd like to hear more afterwards. Okay, I'm not going to take hands now. We'll see if there's time for hands at the end. Okay, so this, I never saw this before, and this really blew my mind. And you could say a lot blows my mind, but this really blew my mind. So in Leviticus 26, right? So here's like, if you don't do what I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. You're in trouble, basically. Betchem ezareh bagoyim v'harikoti acharechem charev v'hayta artzachem shemama v'arechem yiyu chorba. So now we're in source 8, people in the room. And you I will scatter among the nations, and I will unsheath the sword against you. Your land shall become a desolation, and your cities a ruin. But let's look at and carefully to see what happens with the concept of desolation. Az tirtzeh haaretz et shabtoteha kol yemei hashama v'atem be'eretz oivechem az tishbot haaretz v'hirtzat et shabtoteha. Then shall the land make up for its Sabbath years. You denied the land the Sabbath years all these years? I'm kicking you out. I'm kicking you out so she can rest. Throughout the time, the land shall make up for its Sabbath years throughout the time that is desolate, and you are in the land of your enemies, and then shall the land rest and make up for its Sabbath years. Then, kol yemei hashama tishbot, all the years of desolation, she shall rest. And Asher lo shavta, that she didn't rest. She didn't get a chance to rest. This is going to be her chance to rest. B'shabtotechem b'shiftechem aleha. Throughout the time that it is desolate, it shall observe the rest. It did not observe in your Sabbath years while you were dwelling upon it. Now, this hits home in a way that's really uncomfortable. I mean, parts of our world, parts of our globe are becoming uninhabitable. And as far as I understand, there's going to be massive refugee problems being kicked off the land so the land can rest. Ouch. All right, a little scary. Okay, let's go on. All right, I'm going to go right to the Sifra. These two things more or less say the same thing. In source 10, as then shall the land will quite its Sabbaths. I told you to sow 6 years and leave one unsown for me. So you should know that the land is mine, but you did not do so. Arise and be exiled from it, and it will lie waste of itself all the Shemitah years that it owes me, as it is written. Then shall the land requite its Sabbaths, all the days of its unrequited Sabbath shall rest. So this just really sharpens the point. I'm not going to be deep for now. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit about what's on the page, and then we'll see if we read maybe a couple things, and see if we have time for comments. Do you want to say something? You're just looking at me.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's what you do with the leader when you're in the room.
Source 11. Sometimes I think I see that people want to say something, but in this case, I was wrong. Source 11. So again, in the beginning, God stops, right? God creates the world in 6 days. On the seventh, God rests. And that's when, and I never noticed this before. It's interesting when you sort of look at something through a lens, you notice things that you've never noticed before. So it says in verse 2 of chapter 2, and then in verse, I'm sorry, I should translate, on the seventh day, God finished the work that had been undertaken. God ceased on the seventh day from doing any of the work. We could say a lot about this, but we're not going to. But I'm going to say the following about the next verse. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, having ceased on it from all the work of creation that God had done. So notice that blessing and sanctity do not emerge in the Torah until there is stopping. Those are coincidental. Wow. So you want a little blessing and sanctity in your life? Stop. See what happens. Okay. I'll go on. So let's skip this. There's a lot for you to study here, right? There's a whole beginning of a course. So, feel free. I encourage you to look at it afterwards. So then it says, so Shabbat is in the beginning is only the cosmic Shabbat, right? It's between God and the world. Then it becomes a social and ethical institution between God and people, and between people and people and people and animals, right? So here it says, okay, so Zachor Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho, sheshet yamim ta'avod, va'asita kol malchotecha. So remember to have a day and keep it holy. I'm going fast, so I know you probably know this material already. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. So again, that's 6, 7, that's encoded throughout the Torah, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of your God Adonai. This is for Adonai. You shall not do any work. You, your son, daughter, male, female, slave, cattle, stranger that is within your settlements. Yom HaShvi'i Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha lo taseh kol melacha atah ubimcha ubitecha abecha v'ametcha ubehentecha kercha asher bish'arecha. So it's for everybody, the slaves, the animals, everybody in your settlement. Okay, why? For 6 days, God made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and then rested on the seventh day. So here in Exodus, we're given the cosmic reason for why to rest, that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. And that's why God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it. In Deuteronomy, however, we're given the reason of having been God, because God took you out of Egypt to become your God, right? So there's like the liberation understanding of Shabbat as opposed to the cosmic understanding of Shabbat. Now, Roberta, pay close attention. Look, the Buddhist term for stopping is shamatha. This is transcription. I transcribed parts of this video, which is absolutely beautiful and worth watching. And in it, Thich Nhat Hanh says, and I urge you to read this whole thing or listen to the whole thing, the Buddhist term for stopping is shamatha. And we have from Roberta, right, oral testimony of, what Thich Nhat Hanh said about this, which I love. In Pali, shamatha, how it was samatha. The first meaning of shamatha is stopping. Without stopping, you cannot do much. You can stop at the time you walk. You can even stop while you run, jogging, meditation, because you are not running after something. You're not searching for something at all. You're at peace in the present moment. That is the meaning of shamatha. When I listen to this, I challenge myself to feel it, because life is so busy. When can we stop? When can we stop and not sort of, strive after something and not grasp something? And I'm not saying that should be the whole of life, but are there moments like that? Are there moments like that? Could this be one of them? Yeah, Paul.
Another stop. We say Kiddush, we wash our hands, and we stop speaking until less.
Okay, so when we wash our hands before bread, we don't speak, so we don't interrupt the time between washing our hands and the eating of bread. So we stop, and there's that moment of silence. Okay, so remember, this is the Shabbat in the context of revolution or liberation. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and your God Adonai freed you from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore, your God Adonai has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Why? Because Shabbat and slavery are antithetical. Or you can't be owned. And when you're a slave, you don't get rest and time is not yours. Okay, so 2 more quick things, and then I will take 5 minutes of questions or comments. So I love this from Audre Lorde, this concept of self-care. And it seems to me connected to Shemitah and stopping. I had to examine, this is when Audre Lorde had cancer. She's talking about that experience. I had to examine in my dreams as well as in my immune function tests, the devastating effects of overextension. And I want to, challenge the link between like, if we work too hard, we're going to get cancer. I don't think that's what she's saying. I don't think it's that simple. Overextend myself is not stretching myself. I had to accept how difficult it is to monitor the difference. Necessary for me is cutting down on sugar. Crucial, physically, psychically, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And then this person here, and you can find it in this website, Kathleen Newman Brimming says about Audre Lorde's words, that resistance must have a communal approach or the most vulnerable among us will be the ones who hurt the most. Self-care cannot be an act of political warfare if the only battle you're waging is against your frown lines with a $110 moisturizer. Community care is about using our power and bandwidth to support and provide for our communities when the system we exist in don't. We need to ask ourselves what we can do politically, socially, and in our relationships to offset the harm our governments and institutions are already doing to our communities. If that seems like too big of a burden to bear, maybe it is, but that brings me back to the roots of self-care. None of this is easy. Self-care can feel onerous sometimes, but it's really more spiritual. It takes constant gut checks, commitments to self-reflection and restraint. It requires rest and revolution. You can't have one without the other. So I'll tell you what this makes me think. That when the world is not respecting you, you remember that you were created in the image of God. When the world is mistreating you because you're a person of color or you're a woman or you're older or you're disabled for whatever reason, right? Can you keep the revolutionary concept in mind that you were created in the image of God and treat your own self that way? You hold that despite what the world is telling you about who you are and who you should be. Okay, one more. And this is connecting COVID and the challenge of COVID to our understanding of how the world is and should be. And I love this. I don't know who this person is, but if you want to find out, you can find out more about her. She's a poet, author, and activist. She says, we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, if only. One that fits all of humanity and nature. So to me, Shemitah is exactly the corrective we need to what we were thinking of as normal values, or still thinking of as normal values, but are for sure not normal and are ultimately self-destructive. Here I have some questions and practices, and I invite you again to explore and study the sheet at your leisure, in a sense of time and abundance. Okay, so I'm going to really take quick comments now because. Oh, Kathleen.
Kathy Lynn.
Kathy Lynn.
Yeah,
I
I know. I just wanted to say that that letting go, when one can let go, it's like the flow can come in, all of a sudden, all this new information can come in, the sacred can come in, and, there's a cycle of life and death, and letting go is a relief. Like when I have to make a difficult decision and I finally let go and go with one, even though there's uncertainty and there's big impact potential. So if I let go and make a decision, flow comes in, there's a relief. So when you let go of the ultimate let go, which is life, right? There's life and death. It's a cycle. When you let go and move into death, it's also a relief. And life and death are on a circle or a natural continuum. And so what if Shemitah is also asking us to, or is helping us to get ready for this ultimate life-death thing that we have to go through, so we can go through in a way that's not panicking and freaking out, but go through in a way that's sacred and holy, in our consciousness.
Beautiful. Thank you, Captain Lynn. Okay, Marilyn.
Yes, well, this actually sent me in a different direction than I love what everybody's saying, but also like what you mentioned about with the manna and even with Joseph, I'm sort of interested actually in the converse of the letting go, which is actually, it seems that we're almost encouraged to prepare in the 6th year, that's to store up. And also on certainly in the Jubilee year, you have actually that double. God is promising to deliver ahead of time, like in the 49th year, the 48th year, and in the 48th year, so in the 49th and the 50th year, you're gonna have extra. So it's sort of like a reverse. It's a validation that there is, that you see, there was enough, and you see how I could live on the 7th year, I can live on what I and God, maybe the partnership, delivered ahead of time. It's a play it forward thing, almost rather than going backward and saying, I wonder what's going to happen. There's a encouragement to, almost to prepare your future. Anyways, I'm just throwing that in as an opposite perspective.
Interesting. Thank you. Okay, Jay. Last word. Acharon Chaviv.
I'm fascinated by this giving circle. Thank you, Rabbi Anisfeld, for that. And at first, I put a little funny thing about it's kind of like a chain letter, and then Asher Chaim talked about donation systems. But I realized actually maybe the concept that's most like what we're going for here in our Masoret is this notion of paying it forward, but in a different sense, in the sense that we're not giving with the expectation of receiving, because knowing that we're in that circle, we already have received. We are in a state of grace. So it's all basically, it's kind of God's, it's not ours. And we get it, but the key thing is then giving it, because it's not about getting back, we have already received.
Beautiful. So you're just in this state of giving, receiving, and that kind of flow, and you're sort of experiencing the world that way.
It's bigger than the expectation of getting something back. It's one level higher than that.
That question, like, what am I going to get from this? What am I going to get? Well, what are you going to give to this, right? What am I going to get from this, right? Yeah. All right. Well, I'm hoping that these Torah concepts will help shift people's consciousness in the direction, when possible, if possible, in the direction of Shemitah, which is realization that we don't belong to ourselves. The earth doesn't belong to us. The animals don't belong to us. But there's a sense of belonging to the divine, and whatever that means. I see some heads nodding. I don't see any heads not going like that. But that's okay. I would invite this as well. And thank you for this amazing conversation, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Yashar koach, Rabbi, and everyone. Yashar koach.